The other thing we'll need to do is to actually set the enabled property of our contained controls, in this case the text boxes. So we have address 1 enabled equals the value passed in, and address 2 equals the value, and we have city, state, postal code, and country. So now when we go back over to default ASPX, where the user control is located or used, we can set the enable property in one of two ways. If we go into the address tag for the user control, we'll see there's now an enable property, and we could set it here, enabled equals true or false. We could also go into the code behind, and we could set the property programmatically here, let's say in the onload event. So we go to address 1, which is the ID of the user control on the default page, and there's the enable property. We could set that to false. And now if we start up the web page, since we've set it to false, you'll see that I cannot get access to any of our text boxes on the page. So let's just get rid of that because we don't want that around. So we could go back over here to our code behind, and we could add properties for other operations or settings that we want for our user control. One of the other issues that needs to be addressed in user control like this is how do we set or get the values of the address elements inside our user control? And there's two approaches to that, and one would be that we create a property for each of those. So let me go ahead and do that, let's say for city, so you can just see how that would work. So okay, a public property city as a string. I just noticed that we should have typed our enable property here. So we'll just do that and go down here as, correct that for you, so when you get the sample code, you'll have the right code. So now what we want to do is we want to return the text from our text box, and we'll trim it. And then if we set it, we want to do the opposite. Is set it to the value passed to the property. So then we could create additional properties for the other fields, such as the state, postal code, etc. Now, while this approach of creating properties for each of the UI elements inside our user control does provide a lot of flexibility so that whatever is containing this user control could individually set properties, it also doesn't provide as much of a black box type approach where the control knows how to load its data and how to save its data, and may need to perform intermediary validations or conversions of fields as it does so. So a second approach, and you can decide in the end which is best for you, you may use both, is to create two properties, or I should say two methods, one that loads the data and one that saves the data. So let's create the first one, and we'll call it load data, and we'll have it take the data, let's say a data table as input as system.data.data table, and this returns a Boolean whether or not it was successful. And then we might actually do a second method, public function called save data, and this would also take a data table and return a Boolean. Then in each of these methods you would need to do what we did up here with the city property, and in the case of save data, we would need to save the data to our data table and perform any validation. Same thing would be true with our load data, is we would want to take the values from the data table and put them into the UI elements. And we wouldn't want to forget to return either true or false depending upon the success of loading or saving our information. And one point to make here, just to be clear, that we're not loading and saving the data to the database in these two methods, but simply transferring it from the user interface elements to some sort of storage structure that would then be returned, and it would be saved to the database as another part of the application. Now here in our example, I specified a data table as the container in which we get data in and save data. Another alternative would be if you have created an address class so that you have an address object, you could pass in the address object and load the data from it or save the data back into it. And looking forward with .NET Framework 3.5, when we have the entity classes, if you have an address entity, then you might pass that in, and you could use some of the new features like the linked data source to bind it to the user interface elements. And the right approach is really up to your situation and what you feel might work best for your team. Now, one last thing I'd like to do is maybe somewhat obvious, but I want to do it regardless just so everyone's clear on this. I'm going to add a new page to the events folder called default ASPX, and then we're going to open that page up in the design mode, and we're going to go over to our address user control, and we're going to drag and drop it onto this page, and you can see we have all of the functionality of our address user control here on the default page in the events folder, which is identical to what we have in the default ASPX in the root of the website. And this is an extremely powerful and useful approach to groups of user interface elements that are common across your website. In fact, almost any time you have the same group of elements used in 2 or more places, it may be worthwhile to consider creating a user control, because then not only is the look of the control standardized, but all of the functionality such as saving and loading the data into the user interface elements as well as the validation is similar. And if you externalize the formatting of the user control to a group of standard style class names, then you have a lot of flexibility in controlling the look of your user control from one place to the next. So I encourage you to download the sample code, take a look at it in a little more detail, and think about how you can use it as a basis for creating user controls for use in your websites. This is Chris Pelz. Thanks for watching this video on how to create a custom user control in ASP.NET.